Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Fayette Alliance for inviting us to be here this evening to talk about LexTran, to talk about transit and land use. And actually, this is my second time being a part of the Grow Smart Academy. I was here a few years ago, and I remember that because I went home after I got the invitation to speak, and I asked my wife, I was like, hey, so I got this invitation to talk at the Grow Smart Academy. She's like, well, what's the Grow Smart Academy? So I explained a little bit about it. And then she says, well, what are you going to say? And I started talking about transit, right? That's what I do in my day job. I started talking about ridership and frequency and coverage and all these things. And I could see her face. And I realized in that moment that perhaps talking about public transit is not as exciting to everyone else as it is to me. So I needed a hook, right? I needed something that I could say to capture the attention of the audience. And so one of the first things that I said, I love traffic in Lexington. The room went silent after I said it the first time. Everyone turned and looked, so it worked in that sense. It was the hook that I needed. But I said it again. I love traffic in Lexington, and that's when I heard like the rumble of pitchforks and some torches that I think someone was trying to light up. But the point, the intent of me saying that was, we know traffic is very predictable in this city, right? We've all experienced it. It's a shared experience that we all have. And if it's predictable, we can build our lives around it, as frustrating as it sounds. I can build a bus schedule around it if it's predictable. I've had a few years now to reflect on saying that in public, and I can happily say today that I don't love traffic in Lexington as much as I did a few years ago. But I realized that I've been in transportation my whole career in many cities, not only Lexington. And when I meet people who are not planners, which I am, or interested in transportation, they always say, well, man, traffic is awful in this town. Can you fix it? And no, I can't. I can't do it by myself. But it's that shared experience, right? I can use traffic, I can use congestion as a conversation starter, just like I'm doing now, to lead into how we talk about transportation and the theme of tonight, how we talk about land use. Because traffic happens, congestion happens based on our land use decisions. Those two things are so intrinsically linked that it's almost a policy choice when we have congestion and traffic. So the career that I have been in transportation all this time is essentially reacting to land use policy decisions. Think about that just here in Lexington. We have, think of freight. We have logistics and warehousing companies, think of the Mercer Road corridor. We have Amazons and UPS and so on. In order for us as a community to attract those sorts of businesses, which is good for our economic growth, we have to think of land use decisions in terms of economic development. In order to make that work, we need transportation connections so the goods and services can get out into the networks. So we get projects like the Newtown Pike project, which I think has been going on for about 12 years now. Think about housing. I mean, that's a hot topic in this community, is housing. We have made the decision in housing to push people away from where they work, right? That's what we've essentially done, and it creates scenarios like Nicholasville Road. Even going further back, when we established Euclidean zoning, which is saying we're going to live over here and we're going to work over here, transportation is what happens in between, in the middle. So making those connections is very, very important, and is much bigger than public transit alone. I want you to think about the quality of life activities, right? We've got a transportation system that includes the Legacy Trail. That's a wonderful facility, and it's part of how people can move about the city. We also have Interstate 75. And if you think about those two facilities, you don't really want to put bicycle lanes on Interstate 75. Like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? And you don't want to put a fixed route bus going up and down the Legacy Trail. That doesn't make a lot of sense either. So we have to think about what solution matches the problem at hand. And these things are very much linked to land use and land use decisions. So on my first slide here is our mission statement. We serve people in our community with mobility solutions. That's the guiding star of LexTran, and I want us to think about those last two words, mobility solutions. That's not saying LexTran can only be the 40-foot bus fixed route service provider in the city. We can be more than that. Transportation demands us to be more than that. Think of the innovative ways that we provide mobility. I think the Legacy Trail is a great example of that. It doesn't have to be a car. It doesn't have to be a bus. It can be however we choose to move from one destination to the other. And it reminds me of a service that we launched back in April called LexRide. LexRide is a service that really enhances the mobility of downtown. That was the intent, that was the purpose. And we created a partnership that hadn't existed in the city before to get the service off the ground. I say that because on the day that it launched, this was April the 2nd, so the first Thursday Night Live, we were all out. It was a warm day, again, early April. If you recall, the first 3 months of 2026, they were all January. So this was the first warm day, I think, that we had in the year. And I was at the pavilion, and it was busy. People were out. People were enjoying themselves. I mean, Bill Meck was doing his thing. Like, it was a real community experience. So we had a lot of people interacting with each other in a space. That is sort of what we want our community decisions to be. And then I go back and think about Nicholasville Road. It's the same thing. We have a lot of people interacting in a space, but I don't recall myself ever being on Nicholasville Road at 5 o'clock and looking around at 1,000 of my closest friends thinking, this is a real vibrant city. Like, this is vibrancy. But it's very important. To think about the BRT study that we did called Imagine Nicholasville Road, that has a lot of land use components to it. Really, what we need to think about as a community is how we're making these decisions and what impact that the transportation system can have, LexTran included. We can't solve Nicholasville Road on our own. Segments of Nicholasville Road can get upwards of 100,000 cars a day. I mean, do you imagine how many buses it would take to move that many people in a day? It's nonsensical when you think about the numbers behind it. But what we can do is we can increase frequency. If we put one more bus out there, maybe we move 40 or 50 people an hour up and down the corridor with that one more bus. That might allow us then to activate what the community has said in the comprehensive plan, that we want to focus on arterial development, we want to focus on infill development, and we want to build up and not out. That's what the community has said. With frequency, with transportation, with public transit, we can help take some of the burden off of our already stressed transportation resources. So I do want to talk a moment about LexTran. There we go. Just by the numbers. And I really want you to focus on the two in the top right. Last year we did nearly 2 million miles and nearly 200,000 hours of service. We're really proud of that. That got us more than 3.5 million trips. That gives you a sense that this is just our fixed route service alone. So what we do is very important. But where are we now? We're in the process of getting our budget for next fiscal year approved. It's going to be about $39 million. We're feeling the same pressure that you're feeling in your pocketbooks, that other agencies are feeling as well. Right? We're feeling the rising cost of insurance, of fuel. Fuel is very much unknown, of materials and supplies. We're feeling that same pinch. However, we're a very financially stable organization. We're on track to be under budget in this current fiscal year. We're feeling good about next fiscal year. But the part of that really hurts me is we're not proposing any new services. And we know that the community needs and demands new services. With the exception of our microtransit and LexRide pilots, those have one-time funding allocations associated with them. Outside of that, we're proposing no new services in this next budget cycle. So back to that term, mobility solutions. Long term, if I had a magic wand, how would I want to phrase our land use decisions, our transportation decisions? This is it. This is what I want you to take away from at least my part of this program. If we think about transportation in terms of giving every single one of us options, choices. So when you're planning out your day, you can say, I could drive today. I could do that. I could ride the bus today. I have good service. I could ride the bus today. It's a nice day. I could walk. I have sidewalks. I have the infrastructure that I need to walk to my destination. I could ride my bike. I have a safe... He's trying to steal the show already. This is my last slide, Greg, and I was going to turn it over to you.
9 minutes.
Oh, okay. If I could create a system where everyone has those options, that's what matters. Not everybody's going to choose to ride the bus, and that's okay. My job is not to make everybody a transit user. My job is to give people the option to use transit. And to do that, we have to find ways to make it more frequent and more direct. That's what I've heard from the community more often than anything else. So the actions that we are taking to get to that phase is our planning process. Starts with a strategic plan. We're almost to wrap that up. What that does is ask, is the house in order? Are the foundations there at the agency to build this transportation system? Is the board on the same page, or staff on the same page? Is everybody focusing towards serving people in our community with mobility solutions? That's what the essence of the strategic plan. On the heels of that will be our long-range plan. That's, hopefully we'll launch that later this year. And the question there is, what are we going to look like in 20 years? What demands will Lexington bring for us in the next 20 years, and how can we, as an agency, respond to those demands and prepare for those demands? After that is a comprehensive operations analysis, which says, these are the resources that we have, this is the service that we have, and this is what our community looks like in the moment. How do we make sure that we are matching those things together? How do we make sure that we are responding to the demand where the demand is in the most efficient way possible? This is a new process, and it's going to take years to get through, and then once we're done, we're going to start all over again. It'll be time to go back and look at another strategic plan to check the agency out again. We hope to keep this going in perpetuity. What we need along with that, again, going back to that no new services were proposed this year, we need to identify diverse and sustainable funding streams. If we're going to do more and we're going to respond to community needs, we're going to need help, right? And this is a weird sort of dichotomy where we are a very financially stable agency, however, we're not delivering enough service. That's our goal. That's why we like to do things like this and talk about the relationships, as Greg is going to get into, about our land use decisions, because our land use decisions ultimately affect how we deliver service. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Greg Butler.
I have been a planner for a long time as well, but not in transit, except for the past 2 years. And so my career is very much the opposite of Fred's. And when I was asked to do this by Ethan and the team at Fayette Alliance, my first thought was, I should better go ask Fred if he wants to introduce this little presentation. And so in our remaining 10, 12 minutes, we're going to walk through some general principles of transit planning and how it relates to sustainable land use. By no means is this going to be an in-depth thing. I don't think any of us are going to be able to walk out and plan our route. But sort of the general ideas of what the guardrails are, what prevents us, and what good looks like when we're talking about planning. An important thing to keep in mind is that planning happens at many different altitudes, right? So most of our day-to-day work that myself and our team does is really focused on the micro level. Like, where does the stop go? Can we move that stop? Should we add amenities to it? That's a big part of the planning work that we do. We use a lot of tools to figure out the best ways to do that, the most equitable ways. Today's conversation is definitely at the very high altitude, right? So just really broadly, what does a good network look like? What are the principles of planning and transit that make good happen? So we love our mission statement, and you're going to figure that out pretty quickly here. So we serve people in our community with mobility solutions, and to my knowledge, this is coincidence, but I'm going to break that down a little bit from the other side, right? So on the people side, in our perspective, that is the riders, right? The people that use our system on a regular basis. What does good look like to them in terms of transit? And what it is does it take me where I want to go? Does it take me where I want to go when I want to go there? Does it take me there in a really fast way, or do I have to go downtown, transfer, wait for a second bus, and it takes 2 hours to get to my destination? Is it efficient, right? Is it a good use of my money, my time? And most importantly, is it reliable? Can I trust it? From that community perspective, right, that sort of broader, why is this good for all of us here in Lexington? It's more of those ethical, those moral questions, right? So is it accessible? Does it connect residents to essential destinations? I think many of us at LexTran would argue that all destinations are essential, but namely what we're talking about there are school, work, your healthcare visits, your essential retail, right, so grocery stores, things of that nature, but also those really popular social and entertainment destinations are just as important within a community. We want to make sure that it's equitable, right? So is it, if the routes don't go near people that are most likely to use transit, that's not a good transit route, right? We have to make sure that we're going to the places where people either want to start their trip or end their trip, particularly those that have limited or no access to their own automobiles. And then the big thing that, and we're really bad at this as an industry, I feel like, is talking about the benefits that we do provide for economic development. So time and time again, in city after city, high quality, high frequency transit is proven to have an immense impact economically, right? It improves property values, it creates jobs, it really drives or draws employers in to put their locations near these high transit corridors, whether that's for as a customer base that they're looking for, or even that so their employees can work and live along those lines. And then what is good planning like from the transit perspective, right? So what we hope for is that it's intentional, right? So it's got to contemplate all the necessary things up front. A very good example of this would be, say, sidewalks, right? So having a really lovely bus bay pulled out at the new development, but there's just a grassy knoll in between us and the road, doesn't help anybody, right? So if you're in a wheelchair, you can't get to that stop, you're not going to use that stop. We're looking for collaboration, right? And we want to be at the table from the beginning, right? And so we want to make sure that transit is prioritized throughout the development process, and whether that's long-range planning, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, but also just short-term development planning. Do our routes go there in this new affordable housing complex that's being proposed? Is it possible for us to get them there within the next year? An example of this would be the new Central Baptist Hospital and the UK clinic that's going out on Polo Club, right? We do not currently have routes in that area, right? It's really challenging for us when we can't launch new services to be able to provide that necessary service to a very key essential destination in our community. And then, of course, we always want planning to be inclusive, right? We want community input. We want it to be driven by community input. We're a little biased, but we think rider input is also incredibly important when it comes to transit planning. When we think about land use and drivers and what are the things that we see, these are the four, if you're making a recipe, these are the four things that you're going to see when you see good transit, right? So it's going to be density. Like how many people are nearby, how many jobs are nearby? Is it walkable? Is it linearity, which is a strange word, but makes a lot of sense, right? Basically, does it go in a straight line? And is it proximate? Like, does it make sense where the route is going to in and of itself? Density is pretty self-explanatory, right? There's more destinations within a certain walking distance, the more likely people are going to use it. All the literature, all the evidence, all our own experiences tell us that more destinations means higher ridership. Walkability, here we're going to talk a little bit about Area 5 and the urban growth expansion plan. So this is on the east side of I-75. On the south end here, you have 8th and Spoonsboro, and the north end is the Winchester Road kind of area. And this is part of our new urban services boundary expansion area things. And this is a really cool design, right? So the darker colors are more dense development, and then as it lightens up, the density decreases. But very much a very walkable place. When you got to a stop, you could get off, you could go there. Linearity. At LexTran, so this is Route 3, Tate's Creek. You can tell 50% of this is the coolest route ever. It goes in a straight line, a lot of the deviations, and we just sort of lose our way. At the end of this presentation, you may argue I've done the same thing. But what we see here, right, is that people don't like to, they want to go in a straight line. They don't want to take deviations from their main thing, right? So if you're like living over here, and you have to go all the way around this thing for 20 minutes, but you can't just get off the bus where you want to. That's really inconvenient, and you end up making different choices if you have that option to make those choices. And then proximity. So again, we have Area 5. It's so far out that the number 5 got cut off. And so what this would mean, right, this like the lack of service between here and here to take that service just to get to the bottom part of that would require doubling that route, Route 11. That currently ends at St. Joe's East. There's not a lot of development that's going to occur along that corridor in the interim, right? People don't want to be on a bus that's just driving by and passing stuff to get through things. So while that Area 5 is a really cool, dense, hits all the ideals that we want to see in so many ways, because it's not proximate to the service area, to the urban development that already exists in this community, it presents quite a challenge in terms of getting there. Ultimately, planning is super fun until you remember that there's a budget and there's limited resources, right? So time, staffing, all of these things. And what that leads to in our real day-to-day lives is this sort of coverage versus frequency trade-off, right? We have to make these choices. So in this scenario, saying we have 18 vehicles, if we wanted to maximize ridership, we would have the most frequent service possible. 2 routes, 9 vehicles. You would have a bus every couple of minutes. It would be great. You would never have to look at your app. You wouldn't have to check a schedule. You would just go out, sit there, and a bus would come. If you missed it, no big deal, because literally one's right behind it. It's a very short wait time. People really, really like that. The obvious cons of this is it doesn't go everywhere in this community, right? So there's a lot of limitations there in terms of our coverage of where we're going to be at. The opposite end is the sort of maximum coverage, right? So in this scenario, we're going to have 9 routes, and we're going to put 2 buses on them. And what that means is that you can go anywhere, but you have to go downtown first and transfer. You're going to have to wait a long time. And if you miss the bus, you're going to have to wait a really long time in order for that next bus to come out there. And it's sort of the devil's choice, right? We have to make this every day. We have as a community for quite a long time. I can say that most times when I've given talks like this or presentations or spoken to even elected officials and say all these things and then ask the question afterwards of like, well, what do you think we should focus on? The universal answer is both. That is not possible. We can't actually do that. So in terms of our service area, turns out 400 meters is exactly a quarter mile. This is sort of how we think about time and space of what a human being is willing to do in the United States, right? So a quarter mile is about a 20-minute walk, theoretically, and so this is how we define, from an officious standpoint to the government, like this is how far our routes, our service area is covering. The reality of it, of course, is quite a bit different, right? Because that 400 meters or quarter mile may not be the same as the crow flies. We don't have wings. We can't just go out to that part. We're limited by the streets and the network that gets us there, right? So this is sort of how we measure what our service area is. Like, can you walk there to a stop, assuming you're able-bodied and all those things, within about 15 minutes? How we design our neighborhoods, how we design our street networks has a big impact on how big that service area actually is in reality. Frequency, you've heard me talk about this a lot. Super simple but hard to explain concepts. So if we have 60-minute loops and you got one bus on it, the bus comes every 60 minutes. That is your frequency, right? If you have 4 buses in an hour, that's 15-minute frequency. And so just sort of wrap this up, and then we'll get to like questions and answers with Fred and I. Is just sort of looking at our network and what it looks like today, right? And you'll see how we've made these choices and these balance between coverage and frequency for the last 52 years, right? So these are our core routes. They all start downtown. They radiate out from the center, and they do the best they can to go in a straight line. Our forefathers in Lexington didn't do us a lot of favors in terms of street network design, but we're still working with it. They go inbound, they go outbound. The best of them go every 20 minutes, the worst at 35 minutes. So Route 5 is Nicholasville Road. That's probably our most popular route that's not associated with the University of Kentucky. Really great service. You can see it goes straight down south, just a couple little deviations into Fayette Mall, and then also into the Walmart there at Nichols Park, and then straight back into town. Really simple route, hits a lot of traffic. To Fred's point earlier, there's not a lot of great fun that's happening along that corridor in terms of like day-to-day walking experience, but a lot of potential. The way that we operate our service, right, so we have these, with the limited budget, the limited hours that we have available in terms of staffing, we would love to be able to do this frequency all day long. Well, the reality is that we can't, right? So one of the choices that we've made as a community is to really prioritize our peak hour service. So from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., we're doing our maximum 20 minutes to 35-minute service. We're doing the same thing from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So really trying to emphasize and catch that classic, you're working an 8 to 5 kind of job. How do you get to work? How do you get home? And those off-peak hours in between, so in the middle of the day, and then from 6 p.m. to midnight in most cases, it drops down to 30 minutes to even as late as 70 minutes. We have some routes that we've created to try and fill in these gaps, but also some of them, you'll notice, also start downtown, and they're really there to service particular destinations that are important in this community, right? So we have Mercer Road, right, which goes out to some of the bigger light manufacturing folks, the Amazons and FedExes are all out there. Route 24 goes to the jail, famously. Not a lot of ridership, frequency's not that low, and we do our best to try and coordinate these with the main users on those routes with limited success. Definitely an area of improvement for us. We have circulators, right? So we just launched the 2 new ones for the entertainment purposes. Something we're super proud of. It's our first ever public-private partnership. So working with Visit Lex, the City of Lexington, the Downtown Lexington Partnership, the Fund for Greater Lexington, and Lex Park. We have created these 2 circulating routes that intersect downtown. It runs Thursday to Saturday nights from 4 to midnight. Really cool service. Does not really meet our core ridership, but because of this partnership, we're able to offer this, right? And what's really nice about it is it's a high frequency, right? So ideally, this is a gateway drug where people are like, oh, the bus is clean, it's fun, it comes really quickly. And then, of course, we have a great partnership with the University of Kentucky where we operate 2 routes on campus, 7 days a week. And then Route 15 really goes through that student housing, right? So along Red Mile, that whole corridor that's there. Really great ridership. just really insanely high, very consistent. And again, that every 6 to 15 minute service really makes a big difference. And then lastly, we have some nighttime combination routes, right? And so in this world, what we've done is continue to say it's important to go to these stops, right? We have to have this coverage. But we're down to our last nickels, right? So how are we gonna really make this work? We're gonna combine several of the core routes, and from 6 p.m. to midnight, we will be, or excuse me, 9:30 p.m. to midnight, we will limit that service to like the bare minimum and do both of them, right? So we've combined Harrodsburg Road and Versailles Road. We've combined Newtown and Leestown, North Broadway and Winchester Road, and then the 2 Richmond Road routes into one thing that really has every 60-minute service. So basically 3 trips both ways. And that is a very brief overview of transit planning in Lexington. The idea being really ask us some questions. I'm sure we can have a lovely conversation and a more directed conversation. All sorts of socioeconomic indicators, demographic indicators are important to us, and we definitely see patterns within that. A lot of that is on the day-to-day is probably more focused on our paratransit side, right, where we see a potential growth in that area, right, as folks age and that they lose that sort of independence that allows them to drive a car, but the importance of getting to an appointment and maybe whatever limitations are preventing them from even using the bus or getting to the bus stop. That service is something that's going to become really critical, even more critical than it is today. That's a great question. We're doing an entire community statistically valid survey this year to find out. The truth is, I don't think we've done one since 2022.
2022 was the last one we have, yeah. I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head either. We know that COVID changed a lot of things, right? And so in terms of our ridership, who rides, we're still not even back to the ridership levels we were at that point. And so I would imagine that those have changed as well. We charge $1 to ride the bus, right? So the revenue is not driving our finances, right? So in some ways, we've taken the rules of capitalism and tossed them out the window. We have to pay our drivers, we have to pay our mechanics no matter what. And so that hours of service, we're committed to whether there's 0 people on the bus or 60 people on the bus. That being said, it does compare very well to our peers of our similar size, particularly the ones that we looked at in this recent strategic plan. And yeah, I think it's sometimes it's more robust than others. I threw in some extra slides in here for these sorts of questions. Yeah, so this is actually what's in the system on a weekday per hour of day, right? And what's remarkable, and I've been meaning to do this for a minute, is to take out the UK stuff, because I'm wondering if these lazy college kids aren't like skewing our numbers. Like they're waking up at 10 a.m. and really we have higher ridership earlier than that in the day. That's a joke. Yeah, this is what it looks like, right? This is what a weekday normally looks like. Saturdays, Sundays, significantly less. We're also offering much less service. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was shocked. Usually, like, you see data, right? And I know where you run numbers, right? And you see it, and you're like, it's exactly what I thought it was going to be. I was stunned. Do you have thoughts?
I think my hypothesis would be the same thing that we see in typical commute travel is people get to work at different times. Everybody leaves at 5 o'clock. Same thing happens with really all commuting patterns.
The counter to that would be that people don't find it to be it doesn't meet that reliability need, but they have to be at work on time, right? And so they get the lift in the morning to make sure they're there, and then they. Again, I think breaking down what is the UK portion of that is really important, because we don't drop off that service during the middle of the day, right? So 15 and 5 and the UK routes basically maintain the same throughout the day. And so my guess is it's still on those routes that we're seeing that traffic. But again, this is a really interesting slide, and it's the sort of thing that should be driving us as planners to really take this newfound data and then figure out what does it mean and dive into it. Yeah, we've had recent conversations with the airport and even other transit agencies, and my strong suspicion is that, yes, we can definitely do that. We can align it better, that most of their arrivals and outbounds happen more or less in the same time period, but it's the employees that are at the airport that we should really be servicing, and that there's a lot more of them that are more likely to take transit.
There is a lot of research on that in the transit-oriented development research world. And what we do see is what you're talking about, especially with things like BRT and light rail. Around those stops and stations, land values skyrocket. So that happens. Does it happen on a system to our size? Probably to a lesser degree, but nobody's ever quantitatively measured for us the impact that service would have. And again, you have to think, okay, well, the jail, we serve out there like 6 trips a day, not very often. It's not going to help your land values that much. But if we did have good service, what would that do? That's a question that we've never been able to answer.